Wellington Villa was put up for sale. It was purchased by the Presbyterian Church for the sum of $4,000. The Women's League of the church had $3,500 toward the purchase price. So much for the women. The property ran from King Street to Queen Street and back King to where the fence is today and across to Queen. The house on the corner of Queen Street was the home for the gardener and was rented out by the church for a number of years before being sold to Vincent Moore. Immediately on purchase of the property, the men of the congregation started to dig a basement. Horse and cart and shovels, the Camerons, the Hayes, the Quans, the McLeans, the Morrises, the Simpsons, the Weldons, and many others, including our own father. Once the basement was ready, the carriage house and stable were moved across the yard to the foundation. The basement had a small kitchen, no cupboards, but it had a dumbwaiter in the right wall, which went up to the main floor of the hall. The remainder of the basement was used for a furnace room, and the wood for the furnace was piled in it. The floor in the place where the wood was stored was earth. There was a door on the right wall of the kitchen, which housed the dumbwaiter, and this was kept locked. There was also a door on the right wall in the hall, and when the ladies of the church held a tea or supper, someone manned the upper door, and that was where the orders for the dinners were given. The dumbwaiter was lowered by a pulley to the kitchen. When the plates were ready, they were sent back upstairs to be served. There was one small cupboard in the kitchen on the outside wall at the front, and from that kitchen there were many meals and receptions made up and served. There was also a library in the entry at the front of the hall. Each Sunday there was a lady who manned the library, and you could borrow books. The main hall was used for church services and for meetings and entertainment. The chairs in the main hall were folding in units of 1, 2, and 5. For Sunday school, of which there were usually 4 or 6 classes, the chairs were swung around and we sat in little groups with our teacher. There was one manual, or quarterly, as they were called then, with a Bible lesson and a Bible verse. The verse was memorized. Then we got a take-home paper with the story and the Bible verse. We also had the catechism primary, the memory course, and the shorter catechism. Our first Sunday school superintendent in the new hall was Mr. D.P. McLaughlin, Linda Bremner's grandfather. His first name was Daniel. He would ring the bell and call the class to order, and he would say, "What would you like to sing today?" Our reply was always, "Dare to be a Daniel," and we would sing it with great gusto. We started services in the hall in late 1932. It was not completely finished, but the following spring it was completely finished and was officially open. That time was named Calvin Presbyterian Hall. The minister at that time was Reverend William Campbell. Newcastle and Chatham was a 2-point charge. Reverend Campbell left in 1933, and in 1934, Reverend and Mrs. A.R. Gibson arrived from England. Mrs. Gibson had been a Girl Guide leader in England, and she started the first company of guides and rangers in our church. We had girls from every church in town and from Ferry Road. We met every week and did drill, tied knots, marched like the army, lift up your feet and bend your knees, swing your arms. We also did English folk dancing. earned badges, camped, and were in every parade in town. When the Gibsons left, the Anglican Church took over the guides, since some of the leaders were from that church. Reverend Gibson left in 1937. He was followed by Reverend Dr. M.E. Genge and his wife. He was also an overseas person, and they came in 1938. The war was just being talked about, and we heard lots about Hitler and the beer gardens of Bavaria. When the base opened here and different squadrons of airmen came in for patrol duty, Reverend Genge would entertain the boys for supper, and then would invite the young people for a billiard game. He had a large billiard table in the big room, so during that time a few matches were made. Reverend Genge left in 1943. It was during this time that Wilson Weldon was church treasurer. He signed up in the forces, so Arthur Quan took over. Then Arthur signed up and Edna Cameron took over. Then in 1943, Edna decided to get married, so she gave it up. I was approached to take it on, but I refused. So the clerk of session asked my mother to intercede. I said no, but she thought that if I would take it until they could find someone else, it would help, and it would not hurt me. So I said okay, for a month. It was the longest month of my life, since I had it for 65 years. In 1944, Reverend D.C. MacDonald arrived fresh from college with his new bride. He arrived with all his worldly possessions in the back seat and trunk of his car to the big mansion on the corner. They purchased a few pieces of necessary furniture from Mr. Whitty, second-hand and antique dealer. Reverend MacDonald started the First Vacation Bible School, had an active YPS group, and at that time considered a mission charge. In 1948, the presbytery decided to change the charge, and we became Black River, Kishwaukee, Chatham Pastoral Charge. Newcastle became Millerton, Derby, McKinleyville, Newcastle Charge. Previous to this, Black River and Kishwaukee had student minister each summer. Now they would have a regular minister with services every Sunday. In 1948, Reverend MacDonald left, and later in his ministry, he became the moderator of General Assembly. When Reverend MacDonald came, we certainly did not have very much money. I can remember having to wait and count the collection in the Sunday evening service, deposit it the next day, and write a check for half a month. That time the minister was paid his stipend. That time the minister only got his stipend and a free manse. All utilities were his responsibility. After Reverend MacDonald left, we were 2 years without a minister. Then in June 1950, Reverend Fraser Dunbar arrived 3 days before Robert and I were to be married, so I guess we were his first official duty. Reverend Dunbar was single, so he boarded with the Nevin family, and the manse was rented out. In 1953, Reverend Dunbar left, and in 1954, Reverend Henry Russell and his family came over from Scotland, furniture, carpets, and all. This was made possible through the kindness of Mr. B.J. Cleland, who was the representative here of the British Canadian Put, and he chartered boats to load pit props from this area. He was an adherent of the Presbyterian Church, so this act costs the church absolutely nothing. As the manse was rented at the time, the church had to rent a private home for the family for the winter months. During that time, the An apartment was made in the upstairs of the old manse with a private entry from the outside. After a year in the apartment, Reverend Russell didn't like the setup, so at that time we had to start looking at a smaller place for our manse. In that era, the only responsibility of the church was the minister's stipend and a home. During this period, the women of the church held 1 or 2 suppers and a strawberry tea each year to augment the church funds. Reverend Russell then told us there would be no more public suppers or teas, and if the congregation could not pay his stipend without going to the public, it was time to turn the key in the front door. The women, since that time, have not held public suppers, but we do have congregational suppers and take-out teas, but the funds are always for a mission project or a local benefit. In 1956, the congregation held a meeting to consider building a manse. With only $500 in the building fund, we decided to borrow $10,000 and build a new manse. No bank would look at us, so we went to a private source, asked to borrow $10,000, and gave a mortgage on the church property. He was more than willing to loan the money at 7% interest. His eye was on the corner property, one of the best locations in town. He simply bent down, pulled up a board from the floor of the office where he was, brought out a metal cash box, and counted out 10 $1,000 bills. The manse was built and ready in the fall of that year. Reverend Russell moved in, only to move out within a number of weeks, leaving us with a $10,000 debt and no minister. That November, Robert and his father, myself, and the housekeeper rented the manse for the winter months. We had a lay preacher for that period of time. Reverend White with his family moved into the manse from Bass River Charge in 1957. A local mover brought him over from Bass River, and the following morning he told people in the local barber shop that he moved a Presbyterian minister in, and he was amazed that he had an axe and a bucksaw, a first time for him. However, little did he know that they had to supply their own wood, and in that area where he came from, it would be wood. In 1960, we had the kitchen in the basement of the church completed with countertops, a wall of cupboards, hot water heater, and the same year the 3-Point Black River Kishwauk Charge took over full responsibility for the minister's stipend. Previous to that, the 3 Points were assisted with the stipend by the mission board, now Presbyterian Sharing. In the fall of that year, we burned the mortgage of the new manse. In 1961, we took over the renovation of the church hall under the guidance of Reverend White. He helped with the renovations and designed the new windows for the building. We had new ceiling, new floor and walls, a choir loft, and stairs from the basement to the choir loft. And with the replacement of the wood furnace with an oil furnace, it made the basement available for Sunday school rooms and a recreation area. There was a new ceiling and walls put on the basement and new floor. In the fall of 1961, a special service was held with the moderator of the 87th General Assembly attending, Reverend Taylor, and dedicating new front doors, a cement platform and steps protected by a flat roof, The balcony was glassed in, and the speaking system was installed, making the space a place where mothers with small children could take the children and still enjoy the church service. Our first stained glass window was installed at the back end of the church, placed by the family of Mr. and Mrs. D.P. McLaughlin in their memory, and the church hall became the sanctuary. In the fall of that year, a special service was held, with the moderator of the 87th General Assembly attending and dedicating the building to the glory of God. During all that time, we had a strong and vibrant Women's Missionary Society, Mrs. Roy Dixon being our first president and Mrs. Luke honorary president. We also had Young People's Group, Sunday School, Mission Band, later COC, Women's League, choirs, junior and senior. It should also be noted that 4 persons from our congregation went into the ministry: Reverend L.M. McNaughton, Reverend Byron Nevin, Reverend Robert Kerr, and Mr. Brian Weeks, all having dedicated their lives to God's service. Reverend White was with us for 12 years, leaving in 1969. Reverend Posno, following Reverend White, was Reverend Fothrop 1 year, Reverend Mr. Posno 8 years, Reverend Blakey 7 years, Reverend McKay 3 years, and Reverend Kroll 10 years, and today our present minister, Reverend Crooney, 7 years. A new hall was built on during the ministry of Reverend Blakey. The villa, the Snowball home, has been renovated with new windows installed, etc., and there's more work to be done. Also, the windows have been replaced in the new manse and the kitchen fully renovated, and new hardwood floors upstairs. And in the 80s, under the leadership of Reverend Blakey, a new hall was erected at the back of the church. We also sent several youth to Urbana and Purdue for conferences, and some of these people will be giving you a brief summary of their experiences. Some of our ministers were also leaders at Camp Getty. Several of our youth attended this camp. In fact, in the early days of Camp Getty, Godfrey's bus from Black River used to take a busload from Chatham, Black River, Kishwauk, Sunny Corner, Millerton, Derby to Camp Getty. Many of our people held executive offices in the AMS and the youth groups and other groups in connection with the church. My prayer is that each one of us present here tonight will thank our Heavenly Father for His leadership and guidance in the past, and pray He will continue to be our leader and guide in the years to come.